Thou shalt not steal. This commandment is a popular one. Abrahamic religions dominated a good portion of the world for a long time and are still really popular. But you don't need to be religious to appreciate this one. From the religious perspective, this rule is absolutist, and it can be absolutist for the secular, as we'll see. Religiously motivated laws and secular laws alike have a spectrum of punishments for stealing, ranging from mere citations to incarceration, to even cutting off the fingers of the person that stole something in some places. Our text tentatively defines stealing as the taking of another person's property without their permission. But counterexamples are easy to come by, like taking someone up on an offer, whatever that offer may be, while they're drunk or otherwise intoxicated, or receiving something from them under dishonest conditions, like psychological or emotional manipulation. We could call these examples of uninformed consent, but they challenge this initial definition. We could amend this initial definition to include informed consent, but there's still the issue of property, the concept of property. What constitutes that? I had a friend that wouldn't use the restroom unless he was on the clock at work. Was he stealing money from the company? Money is valuable, but time is priceless. If someone dates you under false pretenses, have they stolen your time? Whether it's stealing or not, you never get that time back. Discussing the ambiguity of property and what constitutes property always reminds me of the public feud between Joe Rogan and Carlos Mencia, when Rogan called out Mencia for stealing comedy bits. We all hate it when we're in class and we tell a joke to someone under our breath, and then they repeat it aloud and take credit for it. This feeling that stings us, for even years sometimes, elucidates the potential secular basis for the moral impermissibility of stealing. It hurts. We're always wronged in these situations, but sometimes it can even constitute betrayal. Like the friend who stole the joke and got all the laughs, or worse, a friend who steals your partner. They were never really your property. People are not property, and yet they were stolen from you. We could go into a discussion of intellectual property as well, but from these few examples, we can see the problem with this initial definition and which instances of stealing would be considered immoral and which might just be morally ambiguous. Maybe stealing a joke isn't immoral per se, but stealing someone's time or their partner are both morally deplorable. There are harms that can't be undone. We already know what the answer is for divine command theory if we're considering Abrahamic traditions. God forbids it, and we know that relativism doesn't really say anything. But what about the other theories? What can our other moral lenses show us? Let's start with Kant. Using the categorical imperative, we can see that every instance of stealing is immoral on this view. And I'll explain this as best I can. Using the first formulation requires us to conduct a thought experiment. The maxim or rule we'd be following when we steal something would be, take other people's property whenever you feel like it. Now, remember, this maxim is like a law of physics in this thought experiment. It will be obeyed. It's not like a law that people can choose to obey or disobey. So, if this maxim were a law about property, in this sense, then the concept of property disappears and we arrive at a contradiction. Because we'd have a law about something that doesn't exist anymore because of that law, hence the contradiction. Since we arrive at this contradiction, the categorical imperative renders us the opposite law. Never take other people's property. That's our new categorical imperative. We don't need to consult the other formulations because we arrived at a direct contradiction. But if we didn't, it's pretty clear that we aren't treating people as ends in themselves if we steal their property. So, we can say that stealing fails the test for every formulation. Now on to utilitarianism. Is stealing wrong? Just like the second facet of the basic view we discussed in a previous lecture, we can only say it depends. We need more information. Namely, will this particular instance of stealing create the greatest good for the greatest number of people? Morality hinges on this question, at least on this view. Think of stealing a loaf of bread from Walmart. Will Walmart feel that loss? Will anyone be hurt? Your family will not starve as a result, so if no one is hurt, but people are helped, should we go along with God or Kant? If these consequences are more persuasive to you than Kant's rational formula or God's decree, then maybe you're a kind of consequentialist. But the details matter, and we don't always have all the facts. If you're stealing something, and you don't know if it's just some everyday mundane possession or something with sentimental value, then your moral calculus is inherently flawed. You can't know whether your action will produce the greatest good for the greatest number of people. But keep thinking about this view, and consider what our text says about act versus rule utilitarianism. It might change your mind. Now we can move on to Aristotle. Aristotle will have us study and experience life to become moral people, to become virtuous people. There's no list of rules for us to follow. So, since we're concerned with the state of our souls as virtue ethicists, and we're educated and we know about ethical theories and how to apply them, when we consider stealing a loaf of bread, we can conclude that using it to feed our families may be honorable. But if we wanted to give it to a homeless person in view of a camera because we want to virtue signal, then we know it's vicious. Narcissism of this kind or any kind is vicious. You're a bad person on this view if your actions are self-serving and narcissistic. But that's also the beauty of this view. We aren't tied down by rules, and wisdom requires us to think for ourselves in these situations. Consider this situation depicted by Plato, Aristotle's teacher, in which Socrates asks, "What is justice?" If you borrow weapons from a friend, it would be unjust not to return them to them. But if your friend requests them back while mad with rage, wouldn't it be unwise to return them? He could turn them on you or some other innocent bystander in his mad rage. This is the leeway we have with this view. Our concern isn't what should we do, it's how should we be. I want to be just, and I want to be wise. And it's on me to determine the wisest course of action. Friedrich Nietzsche once said, "I'm not upset with you that you lied to me. I'm upset that I can't trust you anymore." That line has always resonated with me. It comes to mind whenever I have to discuss this. Lying should also be straightforward, but sadly it's not for everyone. Lying is a vice condemned by pretty much everyone, and the variety of punishments and reprimands makes sense to most people. But I've been lied to so much by people who have presumably cared about me, and yet they've betrayed me nonetheless. And it still hurts. But it can go deeper than that. Some people don't know what lying is. They don't know what lies are. I recall an acquaintance who claimed to study at the same university I attended, but I seriously doubt she did. She had recently joined a religion that was new to her, and she said she left the university because of all the lies, what she called the lies of the world, as if professors were part of some cabal intent on deceiving people. We're not. We want to share what we legitimately consider to be truth and what we consider to be valuable information. And that's not lying. Even if we're all mistaken, lying is knowingly misleading people for whatever reason. And God, that's painful too. So, again, divine command theory is pretty clear here. God forbids lying, and relativism still doesn't really say anything. But what about our other major theories? For Kantian ethics, the maxim, "lie whenever it would benefit me," would result in a contradiction because no one would trust each other anymore. So lying, or even communicating, would be pointless. The rule governing the activity destroys the activity. So we know, on this view, we should never lie. For utilitarians, will the lie produce the greatest good for the greatest number of people? Again, it depends. But the door is open to it, so maybe you can never fully trust a utilitarian. But a virtue ethicist, following Aristotle, will only lie to the right person, for the right reasons, at the right time and to the right degree. Otherwise, they won't lie at all. For a bit more practice using these views, consider this famous example. A very polite axe murderer comes to your door and asks you where your brother is, because he intends to kill him. You just saw your brother in the other room. What does each view tell us? We've seen that not lying is a categorical imperative, so Kant says we can't even lie in this situation. This is indeed strange because it seems to make us accessories to murder, but Kant says the act of lying is immoral regardless of the consequences. For a deontologist, Kant's rebuttal is kind of consequentialist in nature. He says if your brother hears what the axe murderer said, flees out the back, and you lie to the axe murderer that your brother's not home, and then the axe murderer leaves but notices your brother escaping, Kant says your lie led to that, and you share responsibility for your brother's murder. The axe murderer would have found an empty room if you had told the truth, and your brother would have escaped. Of course, we can avoid lying by saying nothing, but how will the silent treatment go over with an axe murderer? This is indeed a tight spot for Kant, but again, appealing to consequences in support of a deontological theory is strange, but maybe I'm missing something here. Or maybe Kant uses consequences because he knows they'll be more convincing for consequentialists, the consequentialists that challenge him on this. Either way, it's weird, but as you continue to study philosophy, you'll learn that we like to get weird in philosophy. A utilitarian is going to say it depends again. Maybe your brother is a horrible person and the world is a better place without him. Will telling the axe murderer where your brother is create the greatest good for the greatest number of people? If so, then telling the truth is the moral course of action on this view. If not, then it seems lying is the moral course of action. For Aristotle, on virtue ethics, if you love your brother, then the axe murderer is the right person to lie to. It's for the right reasons and at the right time, and to the right degree. After all, it's our character overall that is in question. If you lie once in an extreme situation, you can still be virtuous, a virtuous and honest person. It's not like you make a habit of lying, and that's what distinguishes your character, your habits of virtue. One lie for the right reasons in an extreme situation. It isn't enough to tarnish an otherwise beautiful soul.